The Shadow Peak Mountains were a deceptive majesty, rising like a jagged blue promise against a perfect autumn sky, yet concealing depths where the trails vanished without apology. Caleb Thorne, 32 and feeling immortal, adjusted his heavy pack, confident in his meticulously planned route through the lower, safer reaches of the peaks. Beside him, his companion, Ilara, lagged slightly, her boots crunching nervously on the dry, brittle schist of the narrow path. They were deep inside the Shadow Peak National Forest, a place where cell service died miles back, leaving nothing but the sound of the wind and the vast silence. Caleb prided himself on preparation. His pack contained everything: calorie rations, an advanced filter system, a medical kit, and, most importantly, the reliable, liquid-filled brass compass. Then came the turn, a narrow ledge overlooking a precipitous drop, slick with morning dew and deceptively loose gravel. Elira's foot slipped first, a terrifying, sudden shift that spun her sideways, sending her tumbling toward the edge with a desperate cry. Caleb lunged, grabbing her wrist just as her entire body swung out over the void, straining his shoulder nearly out of its socket. He dragged her back to safety, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. Their immediate danger seemingly averted, but the silence after her fall was deafening.
Howie.
The sudden, violent movement, however, had wrenched his main pack from his back. It tumbled down the rocky slope, a sickening trail of bouncing canvas and metal. They watched, helpless, as it struck a lower outcrop and burst open, spilling half their supplies, including the brass compass, into a tangle of ferns and loose stone, then vanished entirely down a ravine. The silence was broken by Ilara, who was cradling her severely twisted ankle and whimpering in agony. Caleb knelt beside her, a cold dread replacing the adrenaline. Realizing the gravity of their loss, 2 days' travel from the nearest ranger station, minimal rations remaining, and no guide, they had a small, shared day pack containing only 2 water bottles, a single energy bar, and a thin emergency blanket. Day 0 had ended the moment the compass vanished. Caleb set the splint on Ilara's swollen ankle, the crude fixation a testament to his inadequate field medicine training, and helped her move just off the exposed trail. His initial decision was immediate and absolute. They could not stay together. Ilara needed immediate rescue, and he needed to find the trail back to the valley road. He knew the general direction of the sun at midday, but a sudden thick fog began rolling in, blanketing the mountains in a shroud of white vapor. The fog reduced visibility to mere feet, turning the once familiar environment into a suffocating, featureless prison. "I'll mark the location with a cairn," Caleb said, his voice surprisingly steady, trying to project a confidence he no longer felt. "Don't go too far," Lara whispered, shivering violently despite the lack of external cold. It was the cold of fear settling in her bones. Caleb spent the rest of the dwindling light building a small, unstable shelter of fallen branches and pine boughs around her. He promised her he would return by midday tomorrow, a lie he forced out to keep her spirits from breaking entirely. Night descended quickly, bringing with it a profound, freezing darkness and the alien sounds of the high wilderness. The second decision was the hardest. Caleb wrapped the emergency blanket around Ilara and started walking, leaving the faint, comforting glow of their small fire behind. He struck out in what he believed was the general direction of south, keeping his eyes on the silhouettes of the largest trees. The ground was treacherous, covered in slippery moss and loose rock, forcing him to move at a snail's pace, every step a calculation of risk and fatigue. He cursed the missing compass, the single, simple instrument that symbolized the technological reliance he had foolishly adopted over pure, primitive instinct. The first night was a marathon of chilling isolation, the black trees looming like watchful, indifferent sentinels. He found a slight overhang to rest under, the moisture dripping relentlessly from the rock face, making a dry sleep impossible. Day 1 dawned gray and hostile. Caleb woke stiff, sore, and overwhelmingly thirsty, the small sip of water he allowed himself doing little to quench the craving. He checked his makeshift time by the meager light. He had barely covered 5 miles, a crippling realization given the distance they had to travel. He pressed on, the forest floor ascending steeply, forcing his burning lungs to work overtime against the thin mountain air. The lack of proper food began to manifest as a dull, constant ache in his stomach and a persistent, fuzzy slowness in his mind. He stumbled upon a small, clear stream, a blessing that brought him to his knees, drinking deeply despite the lack of purification. The clean, icy water shocked his system, but cleared his thoughts enough to refocus on the essential task, finding a human sign. He searched for broken branches, cut marks on trees, or even discarded anything to indicate the presence of a maintained trail. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the growing heat of the day and the increasingly frantic pace of his search. The forest looked maddeningly the same: pine, granite, fern, and moss, an endless, repeating pattern designed to confuse the lost. He began talking to himself, his voice raspy, arguing about which way the stream was flowing, north or south, critical detail his addled brain could not confirm. He knew he should be following water downstream, but the Shadow Peak streams often disappeared into sinkholes or spiraled into localized plateaus. By late afternoon, the panic returned, sharper this time, a cold, needle-like anxiety that threatened to paralyze him completely. He remembered Alara, sitting alone and injured, and that image forced him onward, fueling a burst of desperate energy. He had to assume the rescue party would use the most direct route, which usually followed the main river in the valley below. But the ravine separating him from the main valley seemed to stretch to the ends of the earth, an impassable chasm of shadows and sheer rock. He ate the remaining half of the energy bar, chewing slowly, savoring the synthetic sweetness that was now his last link to civilization. He found a hollow log and crawled inside as the second night fell, the cold more biting, the darkness absolute. The hunger was intense now, a gnawing, constant reminder of his vulnerability, keeping him from any true rest. He dreamed of easy roads and bright neon signs, only to wake in the crushing blackness of the wild. The isolation, a physical weight on his chest. Day 2 was a battle against his own anatomy. He woke with the distinct burning pain of exhaustion and the taste of blood in his mouth. He was deep in the grips of dehydration, his lips cracked, his tongue thick, and his movements sluggish and uncoordinated. The familiar landscape had become a threat. Every shadow was a coiled snake, every rustle of leaves a large predator. He was forced to abandon his pre-planned route and simply follow the path of least resistance, letting gravity and instinct guide him. He realized that the compass wasn't just a tool. It was his faith in technology, and without it, his mind felt unmoored and useless. He saw a flicker of color, a bright, electric blue ant, stumbled towards it, only to find a single, beautiful wildflower, not a sign of life. The hallucination, brief but vivid, scared him more than any actual wildlife. His mind was beginning to eat itself. He passed a tree that looked like an angry, twisted face, and apologized to it under his breath, a clear sign of mental deterioration. He remembered an old ranger's trick. The moss on the north side of trees was always thicker and wetter in this part of the Shadow Peaks. He began touching every tree, running his parched fingers over the bark, trying to feel the subtle differences in texture and saturation. The process was painfully slow, but it imposed a necessary discipline, forcing his focus away from the panic and onto the immediate solvable detail. He found a cluster of trees where the moss was unmistakably heavy on one side, giving him a rough bearing for the first time in 48 hours. North was the wrong way, deeper into the peaks. He needed to go directly south and slightly west, following the fainter moss growth. He changed his course dramatically, cutting through a thicket of tangled rhododendron bushes, sacrificing skin for the crucial change in direction. The change in perspective felt like a victory, a small, intellectual win against the overwhelming odds of the wilderness. He moved with renewed, though desperately slow, determination, trusting the ancient, silent compass of the forest over his shattered expectations. He found a cave entrance, small and sheltered, and instead of entering, he left a small, hopeful sign for Alara, a careful stack of 3 flat stones. If she was found, or if she somehow made it this far, she would know he had passed through and continued. The afternoon heat was relentless, and the lack of water was now the most critical threat, making every thought a blurred, agonizing effort. He knew he had to find another stream, or his journey would end before he could make it through the next night. He pushed himself to the crest of a ridge, collapsing in the shade of a massive, ancient pine, his energy completely spent. Lying there, gazing through the branches, he saw it, a small, almost invisible scar running across the distant hillside. It was too straight, too regular to be natural erosion. It had to be an old, forgotten logging road, perhaps abandoned decades ago. The road led down toward the main valley, his only hope for rescue, but it lay across a steep, boulder-strewn slope. The distance was immense, requiring several more hours of descent, and the sun was already starting its slow, ominous drop toward the horizon. He forced himself back up, using the tree for support, his entire body screaming in protest against the final push. The descent was a brutal slide, requiring him to use his hands and backside more than his trembling legs, a desperate, uncontrolled fall toward salvation. He finally reached the logging road, a narrow, overgrown dirt track, its surface soft with pine needles and moss, but unmistakably man-made. He followed it, moving as fast as his bruised and battered body would allow, the momentum of the downhill slope helping him along. The road eventually crossed a small tributary, a miracle of fresh flowing water that Caleb fell into, drinking until his stomach ached. He rested there for 30 minutes, eating the last of his foraged berries. Gathering the strength for the trip back to Alara, he had beaten the isolation. But now came the terrifying race against time and his own exhaustion to save his friend. The trek back was agonizing, up the steep slopes, marking his trail with brightly colored leaves he found near the stream. He moved by moonlight, powered solely by the vision of Elira's pale, trusting face and the shame of his initial failure. He navigated back using the cairns he'd left, the familiar shape of the towering granite outcroppings serving as his new, reliable landmarks. He reached the makeshift shelter just before dawn of day 3, stumbling the last few feet in complete exhaustion. Alara was weak, feverish, but miraculously alive, clinging to the emergency blanket and the hope of his return. He gave her water, coaxed a few berries down her throat, and using his shirt as a sling, helped her begin the slow, painful journey back up the trail. They moved at a crawl, taking 2 steps forward and resting for 5 minutes, Caleb bearing almost all of her weight. It took them the entire morning, but they reached the logging road, the wide, soft track, a sudden sign of comfort and security. They were only a few hours down the road when they heard it, the faint, distant, but unmistakable sound of a helicopter's rotors slicing the mountain air. Yeah. Rescue arrived not long after midday, finding them sitting in the middle of the old road, both physically broken but profoundly, spiritually whole. Caleb and Alara were airlifted out, their ordeal ending not with a triumphant summit, but with a quiet, shared understanding of human frailty. The loss of the compass had forced Caleb to look inward, to trust the ancient, buried knowledge that lay dormant beneath layers of modern convenience. He realized that true survival was not about the gear in his pack, but the resilience in his heart and the instinct in his DNA. They had faced the wilderness in their own isolation, and by accepting their utter dependence on the natural world, they had survived it. The Shadow Peak Mountains remained formidable and silent, having taught them the most critical lesson of all: man is a guest, not a master. 3 days without a compass had redefined their relationship with the earth and with each other, forging an unbreakable, silent bond. This story of wilderness survival and finding strength in isolation comes from Storycraft Studio. If this intense journey resonated with you, please like this video, share it with your fellow adventure lovers, and subscribe to Storycraft Studio channel for more stories of struggle against overwhelming odds.